They believed she left voluntarily until a secret tape surfaced 12 years later. The dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight, a silent ballet in the stale, heavy air of the attic. Detective Miles Corrigan felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the kind that came with walking into a place where a life had simply stopped. It wasn't a crime scene, not officially. It was a cold case, a dusty file box labeled voluntary departure. But the frantic, whispered phone call that had brought him here on a sweltering July night suggested something else entirely. 12 years. 12 years since anyone had seen or heard from Eleanor Vance. The woman on the phone, her voice a raw nerve of terror and guilt, had given him a name and an address. "You have to look in the attic," she'd rasped, her words tumbling over each other. Under the floorboards, the loose one, by the window. Then the line had gone dead. Now, here he was, the air thick with the ghosts of forgotten things. Stacks of yellowed newspapers, a child's rocking horse draped in a cobweb shroud, a dressmaker's dummy standing sentinel in the corner, its headless form unnervingly human. The floorboards groaned under his weight, each sound an accusation. He found the spot easily. A single board, its edges slightly darker, its nails sitting just a fraction higher than the rest. He knelt, the rough wood biting into his knees, and used the tip of his pocket knife to pry it up. The screech of the nails was a scream in the silence. Beneath it, nestled in the grimy insulation, was a small metal lockbox, rusted at the hinges. It wasn't locked. His heart hammered against his ribs as he lifted the lid. Inside, there was only one thing, a cassette tape. The kind used in old answering machines. A small handwritten label was stuck to its surface. The ink was faded. The handwriting shaky, but the words were still legible. "He knows." Miles stared at it, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This wasn't just a box, it was a tomb, a time capsule of fear. He felt the weight of those 12 years pressing down on him, the suffocating silence of a story that had refused to stay buried. He pocketed the tape, his knuckles brushing against the cold metal. As he replaced the floorboard, a floorboard below him creaked. He froze, every muscle tensed. He wasn't alone. He drew his service weapon, the click of the safety deafening. In the stillness, he moved towards the attic stairs, his footsteps soft, his breath held tight in his chest. Peering down into the darkened hallway of the second floor, he saw a shadow detach itself from the wall. A figure, tall and broad-shouldered, stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up. The face was obscured by darkness, but Miles could feel the intensity of the man's gaze, a palpable wave of menace. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was a low growl, devoid of surprise, thick with something that sounded chillingly like ownership. It was the voice of a man who had expected this, who had been waiting. "This is Eleanor Vance's house," Miles said. His own voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm here on official police business." A dry, humorless chuckle echoed up the stairwell. "Official business? After 12 years, you're a little late, detective. There's nothing for you here." "I'll be the judge of that," Miles said, taking a step down. The figure didn't move. "That tape," the man said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a conspiratorial whisper that crawled up Miles' spine. "Whatever you think is on it, you're wrong. It's just the ramblings of a sick woman. A woman who left. A woman who wanted to be forgotten." The certainty in his tone was more terrifying than any threat. This wasn't just a man in a house. This was the keeper of its secrets, the guardian of its silence. Miles knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was the man the tape was about. This was he. "Step aside," Miles commanded, his weapon still trained on the silhouette. The man finally moved, but not to step aside. He took a step up, then another. The moonlight from the attic window behind Miles caught the glint of something in his hand. Not a weapon, a key. He held it up, dangling it between his thumb and forefinger. "This house belongs to me now," he said, his voice smooth as poison. "Eleanor made sure of that. She left it all to me, her loving, devoted husband." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You see, Detective, my wife was a very generous woman. But she was also unwell, prone to fantasies. You'll find that tape is just another one of her stories. The word husband hit Miles like a physical blow. The file had said Eleanor Vance was unmarried. It had been her brother who reported her missing, her friends who had been interviewed. There was no mention of a husband. Who are you? Miles demanded. The man was only a few steps away now, his face slowly emerging from the shadows. He was older, maybe late 50s, with a handsome, almost patrician face that was marred by a cruel twist to his lips. His eyes were dark, bottomless, pits of cold amusement. My name is Julian Vance, he said, his smile widening. And you're trespassing in my home. Before Miles could process the lie, the impossibility of it, Julian moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He didn't lunge for the gun, he lunged for the stairs. Not at Miles, but past him. He slammed his shoulder into the rickety wooden railing. The old wood splintered, groaned, and then gave way with a sickening crack. Miles felt a moment of weightlessness, a dizzying lurch as the floor beneath him vanished. He twisted in midair, his arm flailing for a handhold. That wasn't there. He saw Julian's triumphant, snarling face looking down at him as he fell. The last thing he heard before his head hit the floor below was Julian's voice. A calm, chilling whisper in the sudden, violent chaos. She was never going to leave me. The world exploded into a starburst of white-hot pain. And then, nothing. The dust motes continued their silent dance in the moonlight. The house settled back into its long-held silence, and the secret in the lockbox remained, for now, unheard. The tape was still in his pocket, a cold, hard promise of a story that had just begun to scream. The cliffhanger wasn't just the fall. It was the chilling realization that the monster from the story was real, and he had been waiting in the dark all along. Miles had walked into a ghost story and found the ghost still lived there, breathing the same stale air, guarding the same rotten secrets. And now, he was part of it. Trapped in the same silence that had swallowed Eleanor Vance. Hold. The silence was the real monster, and it had just claimed another victim. He woke to the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. A throbbing ache radiated from the back of his head, and a cast encased his left arm. He tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea forced him back down. A young nurse bustled in, her face a mixture of concern and professional cheerfulness. "Whoa there, detective. Easy does it. You took a nasty fall." The house, Miles rasped, his throat dry. The man, Julian Vance. The nurses? Smile tightened. The paramedics found you at the bottom of the stairs. The owner of the house, a Mr. Vance, is the one who called 911. He said he found you unconscious. Claimed you must have broken in and fallen. Miles's blood ran cold. He pushed me. The nurse's expression shifted to one of pity. "Detective, you have a severe concussion. It's common to have confusing or false memories after a head trauma." "It's not a false memory," Miles insisted, his voice rising with a desperate urgency. He was there. He admitted he was her husband. He said the tape was a lie. He fumbled for his pocket, his heart seizing with panic. It was empty. "The tape. Where's the tape?" "Your personal effects were logged and stored," the nurse said soothingly. "I'm sure it's safe." But Miles knew it wasn't. Julian wouldn't have called 911, wouldn't have left him alive, if the tape was still in his possession. He would have taken it. He would have made sure the story died with him. The fact that Miles was alive meant one of two things. Either Julian was supremely confident the tape would be dismissed, or he had failed to find it. A senior detective, a grizzled veteran named O'Malley with tired eyes and a permanent frown, came in later that day. He listened to Miles's frantic, fragmented account with a weary patience that bordered on disbelief. "So, let me get this straight," O'Malley said, chewing on an unlit cigar. "You get an anonymous tip, break into a house on a 12-year cold case, find a mysterious tape, and then get into a brawl with a man who claims to be the missing woman's husband, a husband nobody knew existed, and he pushes you down the stairs." "That's what happened," Miles said, his frustration mounting. And this mystery husband is the one who calls it in. Doesn't sound like the actions of a guilty man, Corrigan. He's playing a game, O'Malley. He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. Or maybe, O'Malley countered, his voice gentle but firm. You have a concussion, and you're filling in the blanks. We checked. A Julian Vance did buy the house 5 years ago. Legally. As for him being Eleanor's husband, there's no record of a marriage license anywhere. He's lying. The tape will prove it. O'Malley sighed, running a hand over his face. About that. We searched you at the scene. Your pockets were empty except for your wallet and keys. No tape, Miles. The words hung in the sterile air of the hospital room, a death sentence to his credibility. Miles stared at his partner, the hope draining out of him, replaced by a cold, terrifying certainty. Julian had it. He had taken the tape. He had won. He's going to destroy it, Miles whispered. The words a hollow echo of his defeat. There's nothing to destroy, O'Malley said, his tone final. There was no tape. You're on leave, effective immediately. Doctor's orders. Go home, rest up. Forget about the Vance case, it's dead. It has been for 12 years, but it wasn't dead. It was breathing down his neck. As O'Malley left, Miles caught his own reflection in the darkened window of the hospital room. He looked haunted, his eyes wide with a truth no one else could. See, he was no longer just a detective on a case. He was the only living witness to a confession, the only one who knew that Eleanor Vance hadn't just left, she had been silenced. And the man who had silenced her was now trying to silence him. The fall hadn't been the end. It was the beginning. It was the moment the hunter became the hunted. The house had its secrets, and now, so did he. He had to find that tape, or find another way to prove what he knew. His career, and maybe his life, depended on it. The immediate shock was over, but the true horror was just beginning to unfold, a slow, creeping dread that promised a long and brutal fight against a monster who wore a handsome face and a cloak of absolute chilling denial. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and the only way out was to drag the truth, kicking and screaming, into the light. And he would start with the woman who had made the call, the hidden witness. He just had to find her before Julian did. The race had begun. The silence was his enemy, and time was running out. The memory of Julian's voice, calm and possessive, echoed in his mind. She was never going to leave me. It wasn't a statement of love. It was a declaration of ownership, a promise of a cage from which there was no escape. Miles now understood. He wasn't just investigating a disappearance. He was investigating a soul's imprisonment. And the warden was still on duty. The woman who had called him, the one who had cracked open this tomb of secrets, was named Sarah Jenkins. It took Miles 2 days of off-the-books digging, his head still pounding, to find her. She was living in a cramped, run-down apartment on the other side of the city, a place that smelled of fear and boiled cabbage. When he knocked on her door, she opened it a crack, her eyes wide and terrified, a chain still fastened. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm the detective you called," Miles said softly, holding up his badge. The one who went to the house. Her eyes darted past him, down the empty peeling hallway, as if expecting to see a monster lurking in the shadows. She slowly unfastened the chain and let him in. The apartment was sparsely furnished, the windows covered with thick blankets, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight. Sarah Jenkins was a ghost of a woman, her face pale and drawn, her hands constantly twisting in her lap. She looked like she hadn't slept in years. "He knows," she said, her voice barely audible. "He knows someone talked." "Julian," Miles said. It wasn't a question. She flinched at the name, a raw physical reaction. "He came here. The day after you fell." He didn't say anything. He just stood across the street watching my window. For hours, he wanted me to know that he could get to me, that I wasn't safe. "Why did you call me, Sarah?" After all this time, she finally looked at him, her eyes swimming with a grief so profound it was almost tangible. Because I couldn't live with it anymore, the silence. It was eating me alive, I thought. I thought if I told someone, it would stop. Tell me everything, Miles urged, leaning forward. From the beginning, and so she did. The story spilled out of her, a torrent of guilt and fear that had been dammed up for 12 long years. Sarah had been Eleanor's best friend, her only friend, in the end. She painted a picture of Eleanor not as the sick, unstable woman Julian had described, but as a vibrant, creative soul, a painter, a dreamer, a woman who had fallen in love with the wrong man. Julian wasn't her husband, Sarah said, her voice laced with bitterness. He was her obsession, and she was his. It wasn't love, it was possession. He isolated her, turned her against her family, her friends, me. He made her believe that he was the only one who understood her, the only one who could protect her from the world. Protect her from what? From herself, he said. Eleanor had struggles, depression, anxiety. She had a difficult childhood. Julian used that. He twisted her vulnerability into a weapon against her. He made her feel small so he could feel big. He was her doctor, her confidant, her God, and her jailer. Sarah described a life of escalating control and emotional abuse. Julian, managing her finances, screening her calls, dictating who she could see. He would praise her one moment, then fly into a rage the next. His moods a constant, terrifying storm that Eleanor was forced to navigate. He would gaslight her, convincing her that his cruelty was a form of love, that her fear was a symptom of her own instability. She tried to leave him once, Sarah whispered, her eyes fixed on a distant, painful memory. About a year before, she disappeared. She came to my apartment in the middle of the night, bruised and terrified. He had locked her in her studio for 2 days without food, because she had talked to an old college friend on the phone. She said he had the eyes of a devil. She was finally ready to go to the police. What happened? Miles asked, his own hands clenched into fists. I was scared, Sarah confessed, her voice cracking. Julian was powerful, connected. He was a wealth manager for some very important people. He had this way of making you feel like he could ruin your life with a single phone call. I told her to go back, to wait, to be smart about it. I told her we would make a plan. I was a coward. I sent her back into the lion's den. The guilt was a physical weight on her, bowing her shoulders, stealing the light from her eyes. A week later, she called me. She sounded different, flat, defeated. She said she was wrong, that Julian loved her and she had overreacted. She said she needed to focus on her art and couldn't have any distractions. She cut me off. That was the last time I ever spoke to her, and the tape. A month after that last call, a package arrived for me. No return address. Inside was that lockbox, and a note. It was from Eleanor. It said, if you don't hear from me for a month, give this to the police. Don't listen to it, just give it to them. He knows I made it. Don't let him find you. But I was terrified. Julian had already called me, asking if I'd heard from Eleanor, his voice so casual, so friendly. It was a warning. I knew it was, so I did nothing. I hid the box. I told myself she had just left, that she was finally free of him. It was easier to believe the lie. You've had it for 12 years. Miles asked, incredulous. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. It was my penance, my punishment for being a coward. Living with that silence, knowing what I was hiding. But then, a few weeks ago, I saw him. Julian, at a gallery opening. He was with a new woman, a young artist, and he was looking at her the same way he used to look at Eleanor. Like a prize he had won, and I knew I couldn't be silent anymore. I couldn't let it happen again. The hidden witness wasn't just a witness to a crime. She was a participant in the tragedy, a victim of the same fear that had consumed her friend. Her confession laid bare the insidious nature of Julian's cruelty. The way he had weaponized love and trust, turning them into instruments of control. The antagonist was no longer a shadow in a dark hallway. He was Julian Vance, a man of wealth and power, a master manipulator who had constructed a perfect, impenetrable fortress of lies around his dark secret. He had convinced everyone that Eleanor was unstable, that she had left of her own accord, that he was the grieving, abandoned partner. He had erased her, not just from the world, but from her own story, and the victim. Eleanor Vance was no longer just a name in a file. She was a woman trapped, a painter whose canvas had become her prison. Her art, her passion, had been twisted into another form of control. Her studio, a place of creation, had become her cell. The tape was her final, desperate act of defiance. Her last attempt to paint the truth. Miles now had the players, the victim, the villain, and the witness. The broken pasts, the secret wounds, the devastating betrayals. The stage was set. The conflict had been simmering for 12 years, a slow, poisonous burn. Now, with the lid lifted, the heat was about to be turned up. The injustice was no longer a suspicion, it was a certainty. And Julian Vance, the architect of it all, was not a man who would let his masterpiece of deceit be dismantled without a fight. He would grow bolder, more cruel. The escalation was inevitable. The battle for Eleanor's story, for her very existence, had just begun. Miles felt a surge of cold, hard resolve. He would not let her be erased. He would be her voice. He would make them listen, even if it cost him everything. The silence had to be broken, and he would be the one to shatter it into a million pieces. The next 2 weeks were a descent into a special kind of hell. Miles, officially on leave, operated in the shadows, fueled by black coffee and a burning, righteous anger. He moved Sarah to a cheap, anonymous motel, paying in cash, warning her to stay off the grid. Every creak of a floorboard, every ring of a phone, sent her into a spiral of panic. She was a woman living on a razor's edge, and Miles knew Julian was the one holding the blade. The cruelty began subtly. A single, perfect white rose left on the windshield of Miles's car. Eleanor's favorite flower, Sarah had told him. It was a message. I see you. I know what you're doing. Then, a week later, a package arrived at his apartment. Inside was a small, exquisitely detailed painting of a caged bird. The style was unmistakable. It was Eleanor's. The paint was still faintly tacky. It wasn't a 12-year-old relic. It was a fresh warning, a taunt, a demonstration of power. Julian wasn't just guarding a past crime. He was actively continuing it, using Eleanor's own art, her soul, to terrorize them. Miles tried to trace the package, but it was a dead end. Sent from a private courier, paid for in cash. Julian was a ghost, always one step ahead. He decided to focus on the new woman, the young artist Sarah had seen with Julian. Her name was Isabella Rossi, a rising star in the city's art scene. Miles found her at a trendy downtown gallery where her work was being shown. She was beautiful, talented, and utterly captivated by Julian Vance. "Julian is my patron," she explained, her eyes shining with an almost religious fervor. "Discovered me, he believes in my work more than anyone. He's given me everything." She showed Miles the studio Julian had provided for her. It was a stunning, light-filled loft in a converted warehouse. The same warehouse, Miles realized with a jolt, that housed the gallery. Julian hadn't just given her a studio. He had given her a gilded cage, just as he had with Eleanor. "He can be intense," Isabella admitted. "A flicker of something any crossing her face. He wants to know where I am, who I'm with. He says it's because he wants to protect my creative energy, to keep me focused." The same words, the same script. Miles felt a chilling sense of déjà vu. He tried to warn her, to plant a seed of doubt, but his words were clumsy, lacking proof. "You're talking about his late wife," Isabella said, her tone suddenly defensive. "Julian told me all about her. It was so tragic. She was very ill, very unstable. He did everything he could to save her, but in the end, she just ran away." It broke his heart. The lie was perfect. Polished by years of practice, Julian had inoculated his new victim against the truth. He had turned Eleanor's tragedy into a cautionary tale, a way to further isolate and control Isabella. Any attempt by an outsider to warn her would be seen as an attack, a misunderstanding of their special, profound connection. The humiliation came next. Directed at Miles, O'Malley called him into the station. He looked grim. On his desk was a formal complaint, harassment. Filed by Julian Vance. He says you're stalking him, O'Malley said, his voice flat. That you're obsessed with a closed case. That you're harassing his new partner. He's filed for a restraining order, Miles. He's turning it around on me, don't you see? Miles pleaded. This is what he does. He isolates. He discredits. What I see, O'Malley shot back, his patience finally snapping, is a good detective spiraling out. You're chasing ghosts, and you're about to torpedo your career. The order was granted. You stay 100 yards away from Julian Vance and Isabella Rossi. You do not contact them. You do not go near their homes or places of work. Is that clear? This is your last warning. After this, it's your badge. Miles walked out of the station feeling utterly defeated. Julian had outmaneuvered him at every turn. He had used the system, the very laws Miles had sworn to uphold, to build a wall around himself. He was untouchable. That night, the danger escalated from psychological to physical. Miles was driving back to his apartment when a black sedan with tinted windows began tailing him. It followed him for miles, a silent, menacing presence. When he tried to lose it in a series of sharp turns, the sedan accelerated, ramming his rear bumper with a jolt that sent his car spinning. He wrestled with the wheel, managing to avoid a full-blown crash, his heart pounding in his ears. The sedan sped past him and disappeared into the night. There was no doubt in his mind who had sent it. It was another message, clearer this time. Stop, or I will stop you. Permanently, he called Sarah at the motel. Her voice was a thin, reedy thread. Of terror. He was here, Miles. I don't know how he found me. He didn't come in. He just slid something under the door. What was it? A photograph. She was sobbing now, her words choked and broken. It's me, from years ago. At a picnic with Eleanor, we're laughing. On the back, he wrote something. What did he write, Sarah? She took a shuddering breath. He wrote, the last happy memory. Don't make it your last memory, period. The threat was unambiguous. Julian was no longer content to play games. He was threatening to kill her. The fear that had kept Sarah silent for 12 years was back, stronger than ever. I can't do this, she cried, her voice cracking with despair. I'm sorry, Miles. I have to go. I have to disappear. It's the only way. Sarah, wait. But the line went dead. He tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. He drove to the motel, his mind racing, but he was too late. The room was empty. She was gone. She had taken the bait. She had run, just like Julian knew she would. He had successfully isolated his final witness, severing Miles's last link to the truth. Miles stood alone in the empty motel room, the photograph lying on the cheap carpet. He picked it up. Two young women, their faces bright with laughter, frozen in a moment of lost joy. It was a ghost of a life that had been stolen. He was back to square one, but worse. He had no witness, no tape, and a restraining order that had effectively tied his hands. Julian had won. He had systematically dismantled Miles's investigation, his credibility, and his spirit. The injustice was no longer just a cold case. It was a fresh, gaping wound. The conflict had escalated beyond what he could have imagined. Julian wasn't just a murderer. He was a sadist, a puppet master who delighted in the suffering of others. And now, Miles was his only puppet left. He stood in the silence of the empty room, the laughter in the photograph a mocking echo of his failure. The tension was no longer just rising, it was suffocating. He was alone, cornered, and facing an enemy who was more powerful, more cruel, and more determined than he had ever anticipated. The only thing he had left was a burning conviction, a promise to a dead woman, and a terrified one. He wouldn't run, he would find a way, he had to, because if he didn't, Julian's perfect, monstrous story would be the only one left to tell. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and dead ends. The restraining order was a choke collar, and Julian's intimidation tactics had worked perfectly. Sarah was gone, vanished into the ether of fear. Miles was alone, haunted by the laughing face in the photograph and the chilling memory of Julian's voice. He felt like he was losing his mind, seeing shadows in every corner. His own reflection, a stranger in the mirror. He was trapped in Julian's narrative, cast as the unstable, obsessed cop. He needed a key, a crack in the perfect facade Julian had built. He needed a plot twist. The twist came from the most unexpected of places, the art world. An article in a high-end art journal, a retrospective on reclusive artists, and there, on the third page, was a name that made his breath catch in his throat: Eleanor Vance. It was a short, dismissive piece, mostly rehashing the tired narrative of her instability and mysterious disappearance. But it mentioned something new, something that had never been in the police file. It mentioned her mentor, an older, semi-retired art professor named Alistair Finch. According to the article, Finch was the one who had discovered Eleanor, championed her work, and then had a bitter falling out with her shortly before she vanished. Alistair Finch, a new name, a new thread. It took Miles a day to track him down. Finch lived in a secluded house in the mountains, a 2-hour drive from the city. He was in his late 70s, with a wild mane of white hair, paint-stained hands, and eyes that were still sharp and appraising. He was not happy to see Miles. "I have nothing to say about Eleanor Vance," he said gruffly, attempting to shut the door in Miles's face. "I think you do," Miles said, blocking the door with his foot. "I think you know what Julian Vance is capable of." The name hit Finch like a physical blow. The old man's face paled, his gruff exterior crumbling to reveal a deep, ancient fear. He stared at Miles for a long moment, then sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and let him in. The house was a chaotic temple of art. Canvases were stacked against every wall. Sketches littered the floor, and the air smelled of turpentine and oil paint. In the center of the main room, on a solitary easel, was a single, unfinished painting. It was of a woman with haunted eyes, her face half in shadow, half in light. It was Eleanor. "I never finished it," Finch said, his voice soft. "After she was gone, I couldn't." He told Miles his story. He had been more than Eleanor's mentor. He had loved her platonically, like a daughter. He had seen the brilliant, fragile light in her, and had tried to protect it. And he had watched in horror as Julian Vance had systematically extinguished it. He was a predator, Finch said, his voice trembling with a rage that had festered for over a decade. He saw her talent not as a gift, but as a commodity, something to be owned, controlled, and ultimately consumed. He seduced her with promises of a perfect life, a world free from her anxieties. But it was a trap. He was the architect of her prison. The bitter falling out the article mentioned was a confrontation. Finch had tried to intervene, to show Eleanor how Julian was isolating her. He had begged her to leave him. "Julian found out," Finch said, his eyes dark with the memory. "He came to my studio. He didn't threaten me, not directly. He was too clever for that. He just talked. He told me about my own life. Things he couldn't possibly have known. My financial troubles, a past indiscretion, a family secret. He laid my life bare, and then he smiled and said it would be a shame if my reputation were to be tarnished. He made it clear that if I didn't back away from Eleanor, he would destroy me." Finch, like Sarah, had capitulated. He had cut off contact with Eleanor, hoping that without his influence, Julian might loosen his grip. It was a mistake he had regretted every day for 12 years. "I failed her," he whispered, his gaze returning to the unfinished portrait. "I let him win. He's doing it again," Miles said. To another artist, a young woman named Isabella Rossi. Finch's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Then we have to stop him." "I have no proof," Miles said, the words tasting like ash. "Just stories." His word against a disgraced cop and 2 witnesses who are either in hiding or too scared to speak. "Perhaps," Finch said, a strange new light in his eyes. But Eleanor was smart. She knew what he was. She knew she was in danger. She wouldn't have gone down without a fight. She would have left something behind. A clue. A final masterpiece of truth. He led Miles to a dusty, locked room at the back of the house. Eleanor gave me some of her things for safekeeping, back when she still trusted me. Canvases, sketchbooks, journals. She said Julian hated them, said they were filled with her sickness. After she disappeared, I couldn't bear to look at them. I locked them away. He unlocked the door. The room was filled with Eleanor's art, not the polished, perfect paintings Julian had curated, but raw, visceral, and terrifying works. Canvases sloshed with angry color, sketchbooks filled with distorted, screaming faces. It was the art of a soul in agony. They spent hours going through everything, a desperate archaeological dig into a buried life. They found journals filled with Eleanor's elegant, looping script, detailing the suffocating reality of her life with Julian, his rages, his gaslighting, his chilling pronouncements of love that felt like threats. It was a harrowing, heartbreaking account, but it was still just her word against his. They needed more. The clue, when they found it, was almost impossibly small. It was in the back of her last sketchbook. Tucked into a small paper flap was a tiny key, the kind used for a diary or a small lockbox. Taped to the key was a folded piece of paper. On it, Eleanor had written a single sentence. "My first masterpiece." He always hated it. He said it showed his true face. Her first masterpiece, Finch murmured, frowning. That was a painting titled The Patron. It was the first one she sold to a private collector, years before she even met Julian. It's what got her noticed. Where is it now? Miles asked, his heart starting to pound. I don't know, Finch admitted. It disappeared into a private collection. It hasn't been seen in public for almost 15 years. It felt like another dead end. But the key had to mean something. Miles examined it closely. It was old, ornate, and on its head, there was a tiny, almost invisible inscription. A logo. He didn't recognize it. He took a photo with his phone and ran an image search. The result came back in seconds. It was the logo for a high-end long-term storage facility in the city. A place where the wealthy stored valuables, art, and secrets. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The painting, the key, the storage facility. He didn't sell it to a private collector, Miles said, his voice electric with discovery. Did she put it in storage herself? A place he would never think to look? A place she secured long before he ever came into her life. But why? Finch asked. Why that painting? Because of what she wrote, Miles said, his mind racing. He said it showed his true face. It wasn't her patron. It was his patron, Julian's. The full, horrifying conspiracy began to emerge, a plot twist more sinister than Miles could have imagined. Julian wasn't just a predator who had found Eleanor by chance. He was connected to her from the very beginning. Julian was a wealth manager. Miles thought aloud, the pieces falling into place with a sickening momentum. He managed money for powerful people. What if the man who bought that first painting? What if he was one of Julian's clients? What if Julian saw the painting, saw the artist's name, and saw an opportunity? It was a long shot, a wild theory built on a whisper of a clue, but it was the only thing they had. They drove back to the city, the tiny key feeling like a bomb in Miles's pocket. He used his suspended credentials and a healthy dose of bluffing to get a warrant to open the storage unit registered under Eleanor Vance's name. The facility manager, a prim woman with suspicious eyes, led them down a long, sterile corridor. The unit was small, climate-controlled. When the manager rolled up the metal door, the air that escaped was cool and dry. The unit was almost empty, except for a single object standing in the center of the room, draped in a white cloth. With trembling hands, Finch pulled back the cloth, and there it was, Eleanor's first masterpiece, The Patron. It was a large, stunningly rendered portrait of a man in a tailored suit, sitting in a leather armchair. He was handsome, charismatic, smiling, but the eyes, Eleanor had painted the eyes with a terrifying, almost supernatural insight. They were the eyes of a shark, cold, dead, and utterly without mercy. But it wasn't the man's face that made Miles's blood run cold. It was what was on the wall behind him, barely visible in the shadowy background of the painting. Almost hidden in the details of a bookshelf was a smaller, framed photograph. A picture of the patron with his arm around a much younger man. A young man with a familiar, handsome face and a cruel, twisted smile. A young Julian Vance. It wasn't the end of the clue. There was something else, taped to the back of the canvas. Was a flat, cardboard mailer. Miles carefully peeled it off. Inside was a second cassette tape. This one was labeled with a single, chilling word: confession. The plot had not just twisted, it had turned inside out, revealing a rot that went deeper than one man's cruelty. This wasn't just about Eleanor, it was about Julian, his powerful client, and a secret they had shared long before Eleanor ever picked up a brush. The tape she had hidden at Sarah's was a decoy, a breadcrumb. This was the real bomb. This was the evidence she had died to protect. The stakes had just shifted from a personal tragedy to a public scandal that could bring down one of the city's most powerful men. The tension was at its absolute peak. They had the weapon, now they just had to figure out how to fire it. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of expensive perfume and cheap coffee. Every seat was filled. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, their faces hungry. Isabella Rossi sat in the front row, her face a pale, confused mask. Her gaze flitting between the witness stand and the man sitting at the defendant's table. Julian Vance. He looked impeccable in a dark, tailored suit. His expression, a perfect blend of concerned gravitas and weary indignation. He was playing the part of the wronged man to perfection. But today, the play was coming to an end. Miles had leaked the story, not the whole thing, but just enough. An anonymous tip to the city's most tenacious investigative reporter about new evidence in the cold case of Eleanor Vance. Evidence linking her disappearance to one of the city's most powerful figures, the billionaire industrialist, Marcus Thorne, the man in the painting. Thorne's lawyers had immediately gone on the offensive, decrying the story as a baseless smear, but it was too late. The scandal had erupted. The district attorney, smelling blood in the water and facing immense public pressure, had reopened the case and convened a grand jury. And the star witness was Alistair Finch. He sat on the stand, the wild-haired paint-stained prophet of truth, his voice ringing with the conviction of a man unburdening a decade-old sin. He told the story of Eleanor's genius, her vulnerability, and her imprisonment. He told them about Julian's threats, his own cowardice, and the discovery of the storage unit. When the prosecutor unveiled the painting, the patron, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. The portrait of Marcus Thorne was projected onto a massive screen, his dead shark eyes staring out at the gallery. The prosecutor zoomed in on the background, on the small, framed photograph of Thorne with his arm around a young, smiling Julian Vance. Julian's mask of composure finally cracked. A flicker of pure, undiluted rage crossed his face before he smoothed it away. Thorne, sitting in the gallery with his team of lawyers, went rigid. Then came the payoff. The cinematic bombshell moment. Mr. Finch, the prosecutor said, her voice calm and steady. You said you found something else in the storage unit. Something taped to the back of the painting. We did, Finch said. A cassette tape. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, turning to the judge. The state would like to play this tape for the court. Julian's lawyer was on his feet, shouting objections. Hearsay, lack of foundation. We have no idea what this is, who made it, or when. The state has had the tape authenticated by 3 separate forensic audio experts. Your Honor, the prosecutor countered smoothly. The voice on the tape has been positively identified as that of the defendant, Julian Vance. The recording was made approximately 1 month before Eleanor Vance's disappearance. The judge, her face grim, overruled the objection. A court officer placed a small cassette player on the table in front of the microphone. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a held breath. The officer pressed play. A hiss of static, and then a voice, Eleanor's voice. It was faint, trembling, but clear. "Say it again, Julian. Please, I need to understand." Then, another voice. Julian's. It was not the smooth, cultured voice he used in public. This was a different voice. A voice stripped of its polish, raw and guttural with rage. "Understand what, Eleanor? That you're a stupid, prying little bitch. You couldn't just paint, could you? You couldn't just be grateful for what I gave you. You had to dig. You had to go looking for things that don't concern you." A sound of a slap. A sharp, ugly crack. Eleanor cried out, a sound of pure pain. Isabella Rossi flinched in her seat, as if she had been the one struck. "Please, Julian," Eleanor sobbed. "He killed that girl. Thorne, the one from the club. He killed her, and you helped him. You cleaned it up. That's what he pays you for, isn't it? That's his hold on you." Julian laughed, a horrifying, joyless sound. "Hold on me. Oh, you have it all wrong, my love. It's not a hold, it's a partnership. Thorne has appetites. I help him, indulge them, and he, in turn, makes me a very wealthy man. It's a perfect arrangement. An arrangement you were never supposed to know about. An arrangement you'd just destroyed by painting his goddamn face and putting it on public display." "I didn't know," she whispered. "I just painted what I saw." "Yes, that's your problem, isn't it?" he snarled. "You see too much. Just like you saw too much in that painting. His true face, you called it. Well, now you've seen mine. And you know what? No one can ever see it. No one can ever know. Thorne is ruined, and so are you." A sound of a struggle, a thud, Eleanor's voice, a desperate, fading scream. "No, Julian, no. Please." And then, only Julian's voice, a cold, calm whisper. The same chilling whisper Miles had heard at the top of the stairs. "You were never going to leave me." The tape ended. The hiss of static returned. A serpent's whisper in the deafening silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The confession, raw and brutal, hung in the air, an undeniable monument to his evil. It was all there. The motive, the crime, the conspiracy. The cover dash up. Julian Vance sat frozen at the defendant's table, his face a ghastly shade of white. His eyes were fixed on the cassette player as if it were a venomous snake. He slowly lifted his head, and his gaze met Miles's across the courtroom. In his eyes, there was no remorse, no fear, only a look of pure, incandescent hatred. He had been beaten, his perfect world shattered, and he knew exactly who to blame. The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence. Sharp and clear, as a guillotine's blade. "The state requests that the defendant, Julian Vance, be remanded into custody immediately on suspicion of the murder of Eleanor Vance." Chaos erupted. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed. Two bailiffs moved towards Julian, who rose to his feet. His movements stiff, robotic. He didn't resist. He simply stared at Isabella, a final, possessive glare, before turning his hateful gaze back to Miles. It was a look that promised retribution as they led him away in handcuffs. His handsome face was finally stripped of all its artifice, revealing the monster beneath. The public exposure was total, the justice absolute. It wasn't just an arrest, it was an exorcism. The ghost of Eleanor Vance, the woman he had tried to erase, had finally risen, her voice echoing from the grave, to pull him down into the darkness he had created. The cinematic payoff was complete, a shocking, cathartic moment of public justice that would be on the front page of every paper, the lead story on every news channel. The silence was broken, the truth was out, and it was screaming. The trial was a formality, with the tape, the painting, and Finch's testimony. The jury took less than an hour to convict Julian Vance of first-degree murder. Marcus Thorne, his empire, crumbling under the weight of the scandal, took his own life before he could be formally charged, a final, cowardly act of a man who couldn't face the world without his mask of power. The story was over. The monster was caged, but the echoes remained. Miles stood in a small, quiet cemetery on a windswept hill overlooking the city. The sky was the color of slate, a soft autumn rain misting the air. He stood before a new grave marker, a simple slab of granite. It read, Eleanor Vance, 197020013, she saw. The Truthl Finch had arranged for it. He had used the money from the sale of Eleanor's other paintings, now worth a fortune. Their value amplified by her tragic story to create a foundation in her name, a charity that supported young, struggling artists, especially those trying to escape abusive situations. It was a fitting legacy. A way to turn her pain into a sanctuary for others. Miles felt a presence beside him, and turned to see Sarah Jenkins. She looked different. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet, somber strength. The lines of terror on her face had softened. She was no longer a ghost. I heard about the verdict, she said, her voice steady. I had to come. I'm glad you're safe, Miles said. I'm sorry I ran, she said, her gaze fixed on the headstone. He broke me. For a little while, but then I saw the news. I saw what you did. What Mr. Finch did. You gave her back her voice. I couldn't stay silent after that. She had come forward, her testimony adding another layer of truth to the narrative of Julian's cruelty. She was healing, slowly, but she was healing. The silence no longer had power over her. They stood together for a long time, to survivors of a storm, finding a quiet harbor in their shared grief and relief. The rain began to fall harder, washing the granite clean, like tears for a life that had been lost, but not forgotten. Later, Miles went to see Isabella Rossi. She had left the city, moved to a small town by the sea. She had cut her hair, and her art had changed. The vibrant, confident colors were gone, replaced by muted, introspective shades. She was grappling with the trauma of her own near-misses. The horrifying realization that the love she had believed in was a meticulously crafted lie. I listen to the tape sometimes. She confessed to Miles, her voice barely a whisper. Her part, I listen to her voice. I feel like I owe it to her. To remember what he did. To remember how close I came. She was haunted, but she was alive. She was another piece of Eleanor's legacy, a living reminder of the cost of truth and the insidious nature of the evil they had faced. For Miles, the aftermath was a quiet, hollow ache. He had been reinstated, his name cleared, his reputation restored. He was a hero, they said. The cop who wouldn't give up, but he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had stared too long into the abyss. The memory of Julian's final hateful glare was seared into his mind. The case had cost him. It had chipped away at his faith in the system. In the very nature of truth and lies, he kept the photograph of Eleanor and Sarah, the one from the picnic. He framed it and put it on his desk. A reminder, not of the victory, but of the cost. Of the 12 years of silence. Of the laughter that had been stolen. Sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet, he would think about the house. The dust motes dancing in the moonlight. The stale, heavy air, the feeling of a life that had simply stopped. He had broken the silence. He had brought the truth to light, but the house was still there. The attic was still empty, and the ghost of what happened in that place would linger forever, a haunting, bittersweet echo in the quiet corners of the city, a tragic reminder that even when justice is served, the scars remain. The story was over, but the emotional resonance, the chilling memory of a whispered confession and a life erased, would never truly fade. It was a part of him now, a part of the city's soul. A story of a woman who saw the truth, and the man who had to kill her to keep it hidden. And the detective who, 12 years later, finally made the world listen.